South Africa has had at least 15 commissions of inquiry in the last 23 years. Millions have been spent in the quest for the truth. But what is that truth without justice? Let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the Democracy Gauge. I'm Bongani Bingwa. So we've had these commissions of inquiry in the democratic era. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was the first. The country, of course, has had numerous others since then. The probes include the Zondo Commission, where shocking allegations and revelations of how the public purse has been fleeced through dubious deals, and those have emerged. Now, the bill of each inquiry runs into the millions, with the State Capture Commission's tab already standing at more than 356 million rand. President Cyril Ramaphosa has put the cost of corruption during the Zuma years at around R1 trillion. But there have been concerns about the exorbitant price tags some of these commissions carry, with some South Africans lamenting their lack of prosecutorial teeth, leading us to our poll question tonight. Do commissions of inquiry work? You can choose from our three colors. Green is for yes, yellow is for maybe, red is for no. And you can interact with our poll topic on Facebook and Twitter, remembering to use our hashtags SABCDG25 and hashtag SABC News. We'll also welcome your WhatsApp videos to 065-862-4548. Now, our producer Lindiwe Mabena probes whether truth without justice is worth the millions we spend on commissions of inquiry.
Corruption is costing South Africa's economy dearly. The country's GDP loses billions of rand annually due to the scourge. In a bid to cap this, commissions of inquiry, like the one sitting right behind me, have become a norm in democratic South Africa. At least 4 inquiries have been established under the Ramaphosa administration alone. They are mostly instituted to get to the bottom of corruption and maladministration claims at state-owned institutions. While their findings are not legally binding, they can be highly influential. Former SARS Commissioner Tom Moyane and 2 top NPA prosecutors, advocates Nomgcobo Jiba and Lawrence Mkhwebi, were fired following damning recommendations against them. But the trio is just an exception. In most cases, commissions of inquiry come and go without any real consequences for people found wanting. As a result, many South Africans have questioned the significance of the probes, which come with heavy price tags.
Inquiry always the budget state because of automatically those people interview obvious those people they were lootering this money. It's just a waste of time because nothing is going to happen after that.
I think the commissions are necessary, but well, they are dragging for way too long. I think if they can minimize and the amount of money spent on them.
The government they are using a lot of money for commission of inquiry, which I see is unnecessary for them to do that.
However, governance expert Professor Ivo Sarakinski believes the spending is justified.
A judicial commission is a useful way to get some accurate information, some good analysis of what's happening outside of the political environment where everything's distorted to achieve political objectives.
Sarakinski says the only problem with commission reports is that politicians cherry-pick the ones that either suits them, fit in with their objectives, or are easier to implement. The governance expert believes issues that come out of the commissions should be interrogated and tested in public.
They have to be tabled in public bodies, that have to be debated in public for people to see what's inside and to see those recommendations being interrogated and stress tested. Just because a judge says it doesn't mean it's true.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has set up an investigating directorate within the NPA to deal with evidence coming out of the State Capture Commission. Professor Sarah Kinsky says while this should spell trouble for those implicated, the legal system doesn't always enable justice to prevail.
Sometimes the legal system dilutes the justice issues that we would expect to come out of these processes. And in a way, a second best is truth knowing, so that we have a good sense of who was involved and what they did and who suffered.
Lindiwe Mabena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, thank you to our Lindiwe Mabena for that insert. Well, joining the conversation with me now in studio are Right to Know's National Protest, Surveillance and Securitization Organizer Tami Nkosi and retired Constitutional Court Justice Johan Krichler. Good evening to you both, and thank you very much for joining us. Judge, let me start with you. I mean, you saw some of the people whose views we canvassed there saying this is a waste of money. Politicians can cherry pick what they do with these reports that come out of these commissions. It's not necessary. What's your take?
I think commissions of inquiry are multi-purpose tools. I think the current commissions of inquiry working are very useful tools. In fact, I think they're essential tools. And I think the atmosphere in which citizens can say, we've heard enough, we've heard it all, is exactly because we've had these commissions that have unearthed a great deal in a very short space of time. It's cost a lot of money, yes, but I think the corruption that has been laid bare would have spent that much money in one day alone, would have stolen from the poor of this country. I think the commissions are worth it.
Tami, civil society and the media, and one might even argue to a great deal the bench as well, those have been the bulwark against the kind of corruption we are seeing emerge, for example, at the State Capture Commission. But again, a lot of people will look at that, and as more details come out, people are increasingly more frustrated that those responsible for some of those actions are not behind bars.
Look, I think, the skepticism on the commissions of inquiry, it's actually justified, given the fact that very little moves with regards to political principles or whoever is involved being held accountable. And I think that generates the public skepticism. And to some degree, I would agree with Judge Krichler to say it unearths the truth. Yeah. Puts the facts on the table.
But someone will argue, we've known about some of these shenanigans. The media have been reporting about it. Organizations such as yours have taken cases to court, trying to challenge some of the contracts, for example. So we've known about this. People want action.
Yeah, but then you have people who sit at the position of power that then weaken the accountability mechanisms. It was no accident that the weakening of the NPA, the weakening, the infiltration of the State Security Agency, for example. So it's folks that actually weaken states, state organs that will hold them accountable. So that when they break the law, then, in fact, they've infiltrated these spaces and nobody then holds them to account. So I think it's organized chaos. Yeah. Nothing is, it's not just a convenience. Or just something that happened out of the blue, but it's a well thought, well orchestrated move. So as a result, we then get the frustration that we're not holding people accountable.
Part of the frustration is that this is obviously not the first time we've had this type of inquiry, but we have also seen that in some instances it's relied on the goodwill of the political principles you are referring to. In other words, some reports have never even seen the light of day. Some commissions were even whitewashes in terms of what they were meant to investigate. And again,
one was intended to be a whitewash and it turned out a whitewash. The other commissions have worked. It's the fact that we have lost so much investigative and prosecutorial power that has meant that you and I and the people out there are frustrated.
Judge, I'll come back to that with respect, but let's go with the one that we can talk about fairly, the Seriti Commission, right? Part of what happened in state capture was because we whitewashed what happened in the arms deal.
Certainly. Certainly. And we all know that. and Sariti Commission has been thoroughly discredited. Let's cast it away. It was bad.
So that was the anomaly as far as you are
concerned. That was the anomalous one. The others are functioning right now. People are spellbound by what they see. The material is coming out. And then a very important point was made by Judge Nugent that we must not overlook. The mere fact that people are giving evidence in public gives a lot of other people who are also aware of facts that are not in the public domain the courage, the incitement, the stimulus to come forward. So it promotes more of the production of information.
Well, you talk about the Sarita Commission. Let's talk about the political killings in KZN, for example, right? The Moerane Commission sat and held public hearings, yet people are still being killed. Witnesses who came forward to testify have had their lives, attempts on their lives. So again, people look at those examples and say, yeah, but.
To some degree, I mean, I was essentially disagreeing with Judge Krichler for a little bit there, that's not the only anomaly. I mean, we challenged that in a court of law and successfully had that, that report set aside. But if you think about one of probably the most important commissions of inquiry, the Marikana Commission, when you're thinking about...
People are still dissatisfied with the
know
outcome
what I mean?
of that
And you're thinking, Moerane Commission, we're still fighting to get the transcripts of the commission itself. As R2K, we've gone to court and done other things. The same way as we think about the Matthew Commission that was instituted by, the Minister Casrels at the time. What has happened with that? So the Sarita Commission is not the only anomaly. We've had a couple of anomalies as well.
I agree. I concede. I concede that it's the most glaring one. It's not the only one.
So here's the difficulty. We talk about how the NPA, for example, was hollowed. We've certainly heard from the current National Director of Public Prosecutions the kind of NPA she has inherited. And one of the key issues there is budgetary constraints. So when we're spending the kinds of amounts that we are seeing in these commissions without necessarily it's cathartic that people are coming forward, yes, but people want consequences. Shouldn't we better spend the money building up these institutions that have been hollowed out?
Certainly, but the major problem that Ms. Batoy is facing is not money. That's one of the major problems, but the major problem is that her organization has been hollowed out by people of bad faith. The capacity to man a number of major prosecutions simply isn't there at the moment.
But if you have money, you'll bring in the right people, surely.
No, it takes a little longer than that. You can't ripen fruit by squeezing it or spending money on it. A prosecution, a heavy prosecution, calls for a great deal of investigative prosecutorial skill, and those skills, unfortunately, have been dissipated. They've got to be restored.
Somebody was making an argument to say we can only get the NPA working properly probably in 10 years. So we're going to spend between now and the next 9 years trying to fix the institution itself. And that worries you, right? Because when you're having conversation, even with folks that are within the NPA, because, we meet them in different spaces and they say, look, the truth of the matter is, publicly, you guys don't understand the extent of the mess that's in there. It's going to take a little while.
So again, we can understand the skepticism from members of the public who say, yes, we'll know a whole lot that happened, but will we get justice? We'll continue our conversation, and of course, after the break, we'll get some of your views on whether you think the millions that have been spent on commissions of inquiry are worth it. Welcome back. It's all about you here on the Democracy Gauge. The People's View allows you to interact with us and share your views. So let's find out what some of you had to say via WhatsApp video.
I think commissions of inquiry do work, but to a certain extent. I think they are not so different from the traditional courts in a way that the burden of proof still rests on the prosecuting authority. So a person merely appearing on the commission does not imply that they are guilty. So if we say courts work, then we should be able to say the commissions work.
The Commission of Inquiry does have ups and downs, because it gets to the root of the corruption. But at the other point, it takes a very long time to prosecute the person or persons involved in corruption. But the ups and downs is taking a very long time.
The commissions can work. Let me say that. They can work, but most of the time it will depend on the terms of reference and what is it that we want to achieve with them. It can work also if some of the findings that are given by the commissioners are taken seriously and are taken to heart, and also even the law enforcement, they are going after those who have been implicated. Further investigation is needed though. Thank you.
Right, those are some of your views. We continue now our studio conversation with Right-to-Know's Taminkosi and retired Constitutional Court Justice Johan Krichler. The sentiment overall in those WhatsApp videos is there are a lot of boxes to be ticked, and you need a whole lot of things to go right for these commissions, not only to get to the truth, but for there to be consequences for what they uncover. But here's the other danger. We still, and we'll take the State Capture Commission as an example, we still have people who've been heavily implicated in the evidence that has emerged there, who have not taken their right to cross-examine the witnesses that have come forward, who've not offered a different version, but who go around publicly saying they have not been implicated directly. There's no smoking gun, in other words.
No, it's a very strange phenomenon. I mean, deny, delay, hope it dies out. I think that's just been the political trajectory that our politicians have kind of subjected us to. You know, it'll fall by the wayside. People will forget about it. But I think it's an important question to ask. If you've been implicated and Judge Zondo has been open to say, come, tell us your side of the story, and people are not taking that option up, it tells you there's some smoke somewhere, right?
There's not smoke. We know there's a fire. They know there's a fire. Their political companions are not prepared to take the step that they took an oath to do to protect us and the rest of us of society. It's a political problem, not a legal problem.
Is there a case then to be made for doing what we've sort of always done in South Africa? Go for a few individuals, make sure that the cases against them are watertight, use them as examples, knowing that you probably couldn't go after every single individual who was part of the chain of dirty deeds.
Yep. Certainly, but in the meantime, you don't take somebody who has been revealed, for instance, in the vendor bank scandal, as having spent billions of rands illegally, unlawfully, corruptly. He's been fired at one place and he gets another job elsewhere. We know that. Yeah. That cannot be solved by prosecuting some. There should be a public awareness in the ruling party that you've got to turn your back on these people.
But that public awareness will surely come when there is a perception that there are consequences. I mean, let's take the Estina Dairy Farm project. We've had witness after witness talk about how these poor farmers were really betrayed by the people in whom they placed their trust. But the politicians still feel that they can get away with it. They haven't seen any consequence.
And we must remember some of the comrades that gave evidence at the State Capture Commission on Estina Dairy Farm are actually, their lives are in danger right now. And nobody talks about that. They've given us the evidence, it's fine, we forget about them. But right now they're facing, life threats and all sorts of things. That's the one. The second thing is, we always running for the low-hanging fruit. There has to be a fall guy somewhere. Big man politics tells you that somebody smaller will take the fall should a big guy mess up somewhere. The Waterkloof matter is a case in point, right?
Yeah.
When you think about the Waterkloof matter, you think about the State Security Agency. David Makrobo was fingered in there. Sebonga Kole was fingered in there. Who's getting fired? I understand the minister now is busy firing somebody somewhere down there. But these folks have been moved around. The deputy ministers now, the whatnots, they whatnot.
They chair parliamentary portfolio committees.
So you're always going for the easier target, the softer targets, but we don't go for the so-called big guns.
Did we miss this with even the TRC? In other words, even there, some of the people who faced consequences for apartheid-era crimes were the foot soldiers. They weren't the generals. They weren't the ministers of defense, the people who were making the big decisions in the old days. Have we replicated that model without necessarily learning from it?
Well, we started with the arms deal, didn't we? Didn't we bury the old with the dirt of the new? With the arms deal, which we all knew at the time was unnecessary. We didn't need armaments to protect us against Botswana, or was it against Swaziland that we needed the submarines?
Or maybe the penguins from Antarctica,
yeah.
Who knows?
Well, in the same way that we're getting fighters from Russia right now, right?
Yes.
So here's the problem. Does it then not delegitimize the democratic project? Because ultimately, as you say, Judge, these may not necessarily be legal questions, but political ones. When people look at this and they say it's just another performance, we're going to hear lots of gory details, we'll be shocked, it'll trend on social media for a couple of days, but actually we'll move on. And the big men and the big women will get away with it.
We brazen it out like we saw Baleka Mbete the other night on that Al Jazeera show. Is nauseating. And I think that Mr. Mantashe is going to do the same. He's already doing the same on this current scandal. He doesn't talk to the SABC. Yeah. He talks he's accountable to the president.
But it's a political project. Weaken the analysis, weaken the capacity to independently think, or independent thought of the society, polarize it with the liberation movement and all sorts of things. So ultimately you create this situation of dependency on you as the ANC to give us leadership, to give us this, to give us that. So as a result, these are our heroes. How do we even begin to question our heroes? So we also have a moral dilemma.
Of course.
So what is truth without justice?
For me, justice simply means we hell-bent on saying we're going to unearth what has happened and deal decisively with it. And fundamentally, it's about fundamental change. So until justice reigns supreme, for us, I'm sorry, but we're just putting our heads into the clouds and hoping there will be rain, right? And I think, for me, no, we're not going to survive that way. It needs to be fundamental change. Material conditions of the poor in this country have to change, and we must see people behind bars. We don't care who they are, whether you're the president or the former president or whoever.
Judge, what is truth without justice?
There's no justice without truth. There's no truth if there's not justice. The two are mutually dependent. I agree entirely with Tommy. Unless and until society as a whole recognizes that fundamental statement of fact, that truth and justice are indivisible, we're not going to get out of this quagmire that we're in.
Well, the former minister told us that they were smallanyana skeletons. It does appear they're not quite so small. They are biganyana skeletons. But will there be consequences for those who are behind these acts? That's really the question we're asking tonight. Thank you very much, both of you, for being with us this evening. Stay with us.
Thank you.
All right, as always, we throw back to this week in 1994. Then Education Minister Professor Sibusiso Bengu announced government's plan to cut funding for white schools in a bid to achieve equity, he said, in 4 to 5 years. You can laugh about it.
Education Minister Sibusiso Bengu has announced the establishment of a special monitoring committee to speed up the release of black matric exam results and standardise marks. Mr Bengu's department has also set aside 20 million rands to aid needy students at tertiary institutions this year and in 1995.
We are spending more than 3 times on the white child than we spend on the black child. And that state of affairs cannot last. The money must be shifted from the white schools to the black schools in order for us to follow equity.
Lofty goals. All right, it does appear that the no's have it, because as we say goodbye, we take a look now at the results for today's poll, and there are the figures on your screen. The majority of you saying absolutely not. So that's the answer we leave you with. Thank you for watching. As always, from me, Bongani Bingwa, and the Democracy Gauge team, Ubusuku Benzolo. Good night.